Okay, so welcome to the post-flop section, and we're going to do an introduction here where we're going to talk about concepts, play style, and a lot of other things to think about. But I want to open up by talking about the way that I play poker, the way that I've looked at poker, and give you a little bit of a backstory here because I think it says a lot for how I play and why I play. So about 5 years ago, when I was getting back into Heads Up No Limit and I was trying to move up in the stakes, I realized that people didn't really look at poker in the right way. They didn't look at heads up in the right way anyway. Because the thing about heads up is, heads up, the game tree is a lot smaller. So basically, rather than thinking about things like, just like, is a bet good, question mark, I like to think about things in terms of the entire game tree. Because then you know what the equity you need is in order to make a lot of different decisions rather than just thinking about, very specific ones. So I had a buddy of mine who was a programmer, and I basically said to him that I wanted a program that I could input my hands and spit out a game tree, right? Just take the hands and make it a very, I just want to see the tree and then color code it based on fold frequency or once certain numbers hit certain thresholds. And then past that, I managed to make it so that it could filter by board texture and get a lot more specific. So I got a lot stronger over time as well. But the thing was, it really opened my eyes to the way that heads-up poker should be played compared to how it was being played. And that means that you need to be on top of your game in all of the different parts of the tree. If it goes check, check, flop, you need to be on top of that. If it goes, bet, flop, call, bet, flop, your opponent calls, you need to be on top of that. You need to be on top of everything that, all the parts of the tree that are important, you need to be balancing out. Now, it's okay in some spots to be overfolding on your tree because let's say that your primary action, as a simple example, let's say you 3-bet and you decide you're going to c-bet the flop 80%, which I don't really advocate, but that's a bit of a different story. We'll get there eventually. But let's just say that you decide to 3-bet and they call and you're going to c-bet 80% or something. Then it becomes a lot less important that the 20% check is adequately balanced because your opponent can't float you pre-flop in order to get these non-equity opportunities because, if they call pre-flop too light, they're going to face a c-bet 80% of the time. So if they do want to call with hands like 8-6 off or 8-5 off or 7-2 suited, in general, they're not going to get that opportunity to float you unless, after you do c-bet, you're playing weak. That would be a big problem. If you're going to c-bet 80% and then play well after that, it's not an issue. If you're going to c-bet 80% and then have weaknesses, that is an issue. But the thing is, in prominent lines, in lines that have high frequency, you have to play in a way that does not allow your opponent the ability to use either, very low equity hands as bluffs or just even non-equity hands as bluffs. Because by doing that, you allow them opportunity to really run you over in non-showdown and play a ton of hands in ways that make a lot of money by just bluffing you essentially all over the place because you're not countering them. And what I found was in 2011, 2012, when I started doing this, players did not only did players not know this existed, they didn't think of poker like this. They tend to think more about big pots. I tend to play a lot more around the small pots. And essentially, whenever I would play someone, I would take their hands and I would break it down and I would look at the game tree and then I would map out a counter plan based around equity thresholds around their strategy. And just to kind of give you like a general example, when you continuation bet on the flop after raising pre, you get to have more bluffs there than if you delay c-bet or if you double delay c-bet because you get more opportunities to bet turn and bet river. And so because of that, you get to bluff with more hands because there's more opportunity for you to realize equity, there's more opportunity to make your opponent fold, and there's a lot more threat there on the turn and the river. That's not the case so much on a delay c-bet. If you check back the flop and bet the turn, you only get the turn and the river. And then that's certainly not the case on a double delay c-bet, where if it checks down on the river and you bet, they're only ever going to face that immediate bet. So their flop play has to take into consideration that there will be future bets. Their turn play has to take some degree of that, and their river play has to take some as well. So the way that I looked at it was, I'm going to play all of these lines in a way where my opponent can't really bluff me very frequently, unless I think that they're under bluffing so much that I'm okay with folding. But my opponent can't really bluff me with any kind of high frequency. And additionally, I'm going to weight my bluffs into lines that need the lowest equity required to bet. So as an example, let's say someone's fold to flop c-bet was 40, and their fold to turn c-bet was 50, and their fold to delay c-bet rather was 50, and their fold to double delay was 70, which honestly was the case a lot back in the day. Nowadays players are more balanced, but they tend to just probe or delay probe too many good hands rather than trap. Well, what I would do is I would still bluff c-bet, but as a portion of my bluffs, I would be way more likely to put them into delay or double delay because those needed so much less equity. Now, there is another note here in that if your opponent has very high probe, you can't do this. So like for example, let's say your opponent folds 40 to c-bet, and if you check back, they're going to probe 80. Well, you can't try and delay c-bet all your air because you're not getting there enough. They're going to be probing 80% of the time. And the thing is, if they're probing 80%, there's going to be a whole host of other issues they're going to have. And you're going to develop a raise range, and you're going to start checking back when we're good hands because you make so much money when you check back. So there's a bunch of counters that you would bust out if they tried to probe 80. But the point remains that if they decide to do that, delay c-betting would not be a very solid strategy because you wouldn't reach it enough. It's not a prominent line, and that's a really important term. You want to base your play more on the prominent lines, and put emphasis on the smaller lines, the smaller subset of the tree, depending on how often it happens. So I actually took a tree here. It's a very old tree because I didn't really want to just blast somebody I recently played or I played in the last year or two with all of their tree. So I took a match I played against Asian Fleshy about 4 or 5 years ago. It's a very old tree. But I wanted to just take this and show you kind of the way that I think about poker. All right, so, and this might be too small. I'll zoom in like as necessary. Actually, can I do that? We're in Paint. Some high level stuff here, guys. Can we use Paint to zoom? I think you actually should be able to see this, I guess, if you zoom in closely. If not, my apologies. Anyway, so this would be his button, right? And he would open 92%. So we'd kick it off with the pre-flop analysis that we did. He's opening 92, and he folded through only 43 or 44, which is a very, very low percentage. So what I would do is I would open up my equity required to 3-bet, put in 92, put in 44 fold, put in 10% 4-bet, and get the equity required, which ended up being a much higher number. Now, again, I guess I don't think I adjusted correctly fully to this because I 3-bet 21%, and I wish I could zoom in. There's got to be a way to zoom, right? Let me see here. Is there a way to zoom? I guess I can go like this. All right, this is, okay, that's probably better, just to be able to see this correctly. But anyway, so the point is that when you would open 92, I should 3-bet less, or I 3-bet more because 92 is a quite a loose open. However, given the equity required with a 44% fold, a 10% 4-bet, and a 45% call, you actually have a lot of equity here. So I think like you can kind of tell out of the gate, I didn't do a great job of adjusting to this open / defense strategy. My 21% 3-bet should look more like 17, 18. Now, if he calls, and I bet, doesn't really fold flop, only folded 32. And I know you guys are going to have a hard time looking at this. That's okay. I'm just kind of walking you through the way that I think about poker. But so if I 3-bet and he called, he'd fold 32, 27, 36 by street. And so even though I bet 37 on the flop and I mainly barreled 55 turn, 61 river, again, you can't really bluff here. So you couldn't really bluff 3-bet, you couldn't really bluff c-bet, you couldn't really bluff turn c-bet, and you couldn't really bluff river c-bet. So essentially, against this guy, this line required a lot of equity. 3-bet and then barrel off required a lot of equity. Now, you should still have bluffs, and you should still work bluffs into this range because he didn't raise much in each street. It was 1% flop, 4% turn, and then obviously never on the river. But the river is break even, and if you're bluffing, his fold's probably lower, probably more like 30 or 35 or whatever, because you don't block his calls. So it's very unlikely that bluffing as a 3-bet and barrel off really is almost ever good. You need about 40% equity on basically every street up until the river, and then the river's break even. So you'd want to do some, like let's just say my normal strategy, I'd have about a third bluffs there. I would have more like a fourth or a fifth or a sixth against a player that played like this, because you just simply do not have the equity. Now, if I checked the flop, let me check out a different part of the tree now. Let's see if we go over here. So if I check the flop, he bet 42, to which I folded 20, which I probably actually should have folded a little bit more here. And if he did bet, he barreled the turn a lot, but the river not so often. 65 turn, 42 river. So I would look at that, and I'd be like, okay, so against this player over a larger sample, if this continues to be like this, I definitely want to develop a turn check raise range, because the frequency here is too high relative to the river bet. And additionally, it's okay to check call more hands light on the turn against this player because he's going so many bet check lines. So my equity that I realize increases on the turn check call given his low river barrel. Now, I'm not expecting you guys to really understand like anything about what's going on here. But like, for example, I guess to finish that point, I'm giving you insight into the way that I approach poker. So if I 3-bet and he calls and it goes check, check, flop, which it mainly does because I mainly check and he mainly checks back. If I elected to bet the turn, then he would only fold 33 here, but he folded 58% of the follow-up. So I assume that part of the reason why I 3-bet 21 instead of like 18 or 19 or 17 was that the equity required on delay and barrel was a lot lower, given that we mainly got to the turn with check, check. And even though he didn't fold much on the turn, he didn't raise me there. And if I barreled the river, then I mainly got folds. So this needed like no equity for this line. And then if I checked all the way down to the river and bet, he folded 64. And I really pounded that because I bet 47% here and got 64% fold. But if I checked and he bet, I only folded 14. So now that I'm looking at the tree, it makes more sense that I elected to go with a 21% 3-bet strategy. And so I guess I just want to say this, because there's a lot of different ways to looking at a lot of different ways to looking. Good English. There's a lot of different ways to look at poker. And we're going to take game theory elements across the whole thing. We'll always start with a theoretical approach. But we're gonna map our strategies out, and I'm going to teach you the counters to how to play against people that are exploiting different parts of the tree. And this is like some seriously basic software. I don't know what else is out there. I don't know if something does something like this. But the bottom line is this is extremely basic software. It's just the hands put in the colorful ranges that I use for critical analysis. And if you get really good at playing this style of poker, you're really fucking hard to beat because you know the equity thresholds across all parts of the tree. You're able to bluff very efficiently. You're able to allocate bluffs effectively. And as you get more hands against players, you get a much better picture of what they're doing. And additionally, as you break it down by board texture, you can even get a better idea versus certain opponents. So I don't want to overwhelm anyone. I know that there were some people during the tree explanation of how to play 3-bet plots there that were just like, dude, I have no idea what's going on. And I had many horses when I showed this tree to that they were like, do I have to use this? And the answer was yes, but I'll help you out, and I'll help you guys out too. Now, I don't really want to go through and break down a lot of the players' trees that are currently playing and stuff because I don't think it's very fair to them. I wouldn't be very happy if someone did that to me. So we'll look at maybe some older trees. We'll look at the kinds of adjustments to make. But we're gonna start off by just talking about single raise pots probably, and we'll talk about that. I think single raise pots are probably the most important pots because the game tree is the largest, giving us the most opportunity for counters and recounters and everything. So we'll start with single raise pots. I want to talk a lot about that on both sides of the coin, and then we'll do a little bit on 3-bet and 4-bet pots. I'm not really going to spend that much on like 4 and 5-bet pots really because it's so infrequent. I want my coaching time to be spent proportional to the amount that certain subjects are covered, or rather that certain subjects happen, so that you're well prepared for all of these different scenarios. And man, I cannot believe I'm actually going to teach this because this is my baby. Like I seriously have spent so much of my life perfecting this that in a way it actually does make me a little bit sad because this is like the real deal. Like this is how I play poker. This is how I got to the top. And, putting it out there, it does make me sad. The thing is, it makes sense now for me because there's not many opponents. There's only a couple guys left that will even play me. I spent a couple years waiting and not playing anyone. And, I am sorry for what this will do to the state of the game is because the people that have this, they're going to have such an edge on other people on how to think about it. But this is the way to think about poker, or rather heads up. This type of mindset, will this beat the GTO perfected robot down the road? No. But will this put you in a position to beat almost anyone in the entire world, including a lot of these robots that are not currently very good? Yes, you will absolutely be in the mix to win any game with the pre-flop fundamentals you've been taught and this type of post-flop approach. I mean, you're just not going to, it just works. This is how I got to where I am. So, long-winded, but this is the intro for the post-flop section, and we're going to kick it off and go through a lot of single race pot stuff.